The Miami Dolphins, they win this game 23-15, and sort of like I talked about in the intro, it feels like, man, Miami needed this one. It's been a down season for the Miami Dolphins, and obviously it's a team that was extremely potent, one of the most explosive offenses in the NFL last year. Tua gets hurt at the beginning of the season, and boy, through, I would say, the whole first half of this year, they have been one of the least explosive teams in the NFL. And Ollie, we know quarterback is very, very important. I don't even know if I knew that it was this important, especially what Tua was to this team, because holy cow, this looked like a lifeless offense. It looked like a lifeless team without Tua. Now he comes back after the concussion injury, and they go on the road and get a huge win in Los Angeles. The offense looks a little bit better. Overall thoughts on this game. Was it more you loved what you saw from Miami, or were you more disappointed in the Rams? So I said kind of still had playoff aspirations before this game.
Yeah, I think slightly more disappointed to the Rams. A great victory, obviously, for the Dolphins on the road. Defense came to play finally, which I think was the big breakout story for them. Offense got just enough done and really kind of clustered what they did well to the opening drives of both halves. I think once you kind of got into the game, it wasn't quite as slick and proficient as we're used to seeing, right, where they can just kind of trigger and drive up and down the field. Particularly since Tua's come back, they've just been so crisp and relentless and rhythm-based for the most part, not always finishing drives, but you can see them just kind of melodically get down the field the way they do when they're rolling at their best. To me, it was more the Rams. You've got the 3 fumbles, 2 turnovers, can't convert on third downs, a bunch of penalties, a ton of unblocked pressures despite getting guys healthy, right, and getting that group back into some sort of way that they wanted it to be. I thought really poor situational decisions from McVay just in terms of the general flow of the game when they're running the ball, when they tried to throw the ball. Bad tackling, just kind of go on down the line. When you get to a close loss like this and you're playing catch with the end, those are the things I think that jump out and stack up, just like all the little things, all the general bad football stuff went against the Rams.
Man, I was really impressed with Tua in this game. Ends up finishing 20 for 28, over 200 yards, 207 yards, a touchdown and an interception. But, we were chatting a little bit before the show began, and I wanted to make sure to bring it up. We've talked about Tua as this sort of statue quarterback, right? I mean, he's just this guy who, it's a pocket passer. He basically does whatever McDaniels tells him. Like he can't think creatively. He can't think on his feet, out of structure. He's not a really great quarterback. It's tough to rely on him in those situations. I felt like he was pretty decent in those situations last night. And for as much as this is a guy who's suffered some really bad concussions before, I mean, look, you don't need to try to be making a tackle on an interception. We can try to put that to bed. Do the old Tom Brady where when you throw interception, you just stand there and you just, put the head back. That's all we want from you at this point, too. I know he's trying to be a good teammate, but we need you out there, buddy. We really do. When the pressure was mounting on him, you saw him have to roll out. You saw him have to, make throws while taking hits. And I just wanted to give him his flowers in this game because this was a really good performance when things weren't going well for Tua, in my opinion. At least it was better than what we have seen in the past. And I thought that was a major reason because a couple of those throws were those big-time throws, not literally, I guess, categorized. I mean, just the phrase, they were bigger throws because they meant a lot more when he was getting pressured and he was completing them. The defensive line was doing their job on LA's side of things, but Tua was able to make up for it with those really good playmakers, especially right out of the gate in that first drive. We saw a lot of that, too. So what did you see from Tua? Did you see the same thing? Were you as impressed when it came to the off-script stuff with him?
Yeah, I think you nailed it. The off-schedule stuff with him has always been the concern. Is that how you can get after them, right? If you just flood it with zone coverage on the back end, get all the eyes on him, kind of keep a lid on the down the field stuff, is the line good enough to hold up? And last night they struggled. Turner got after them, Verse got after them, just one after one. The Rams came crashing home. They were pretty sound in coverage as well. A bunch of coverage sacks and coverage pressures, I would say, more so than just guys ripping off the edge and winning one-on-one battles. And you saw with Tua, it was his lowest percentage of throws beyond the sticks this season. It was so long as he's held onto the ball. And that's always been the thing with him. You go back to a really poor game a year ago against the Niners. That became kind of the en vogue thing, right? Can you just put so many bodies in the middle of the field as possible where he usually tortures people, get as many eyes on him, get some pressure, force him to move, and when he moves, he's just not as accurate. His decisions go haywire. And the Rams had that right game plan, and I think they were effective in part doing it. But as you said, there was probably 3 or 4 what would be game-clinching plays, if not big-time throws, as you said, in kind of the charted way of doing it. But the game-clinching, game-on-the-line type stuff was him moving and creating to his right, not just to his left, which is where it's always been a complete disaster when he has to move to his right normally. So that to me was like, that is a quarterback elevating the offense when things are just going wrong. Do you have to figure it out, Gene? Can you just get the ball to somewhere it needs to go? Can you get it in the hand of a playmaker who can go make someone miss? On some of those plays where he moved to create was when they forced a ton of the missed tackles that the Rams had. They just couldn't break down in space. So I thought that in terms of just figuring out, okay, the defensive game plan's really solid. They've got me. This is where I usually struggle. He did have the turnovers in one of those situations. Really, really poor pick, just kind of like flustered and bailing and panicking and throwing it into an area where he was picked off by a linebacker. But outside of that, for the most part, that was not where kind of the turnover-worthy plays and the really bad stuff happened. That was more within the structure of the offense. Things just don't look right, and I'm not sure where to go with the ball. When he did move and take off and try and do things on his own off script, he actually was pretty impressive, which is just not typically his game. So to get through one of those matchups on the road in a must-have game to try and stay in the playoffs, I thought it was pretty impressive stuff.
Yeah, I want to go to the defensive line and switch to the other side of things too, because we've talked about, all right, well, they haven't had Jalen Phillips for a little bit. Unfortunately, suffered another injury. They obviously have not had Bradley Chubb as well, so it's sort of been an up and down journey, I think, to say the least, for the Miami Dolphins. And as the offense has really struggled, the defense really has not been good enough to hold up their end of the bargain. I think their record, certainly before last night, showcased that. But along the defensive line specifically, you look at Chop Robinson, you look at Calais Campbell, you look at Zach Seifert, like those guys were playing well, and it yielded the highest pass rush grade in a single game as a team that they have had so far this season. 75.0 pass rushing grade for the Miami Dolphins defensive line. That's defensive tackles and edge rushers sort of lumped together. Highest single game grade that they have had. And when it comes to just overall defensive line grade, it was the second highest grade that they have had so far this season. So really good stuff from the Dolphins defensive line. And with this being a trench show, you and I were chatting a little bit about Chop Robinson, who we weren't the biggest fans of when he was coming through the draft. I mean, I felt like he was more just a pass rush specialist kind of a guy. You talked about him as more of a potential stand-up linebacker, somebody who you could sort of use all over the line of scrimmage and sort of just try to use that explosiveness. But the Dolphins didn't draft him that way, right? The Dolphins drafted him in the first round, right in the early 20s. And when you do that, you're expecting this guy to be a three-down defensive lineman for you. You are expecting him to be a premier, build around him type of an edge rusher, an impact player. And I was not sure if he was going to be that player in the NFL level. Obviously, they've got a lot of time to really answer that question, but certainly last night he helped them out. Over 15% win percentage, got a sack. I believe it was 7 pressures in this game that he ended up recording for the team. And so really good game from Chop Robinson, and I think when they really needed him most. But what did you see just from this Dolphins defensive line and then Chop specifically?
Yeah, Chop specifically, that's his best game as a pro, comfortably. And I was saying to you before, the thing with Chop Robinson's always been, we get the first step explosives. I get all the tools and the traits. What do they actually add up to in the end? Does he finish plays? Does he make impact plays? And I thought at Penn State, that happened mostly when he was inside as a mugged linebacker, when it was just pure get off the ball juice, make a clumsy guard or center miss, and you could just penetrate through to the backfield. There's nowhere really for the quarterback to escape. I didn't love the variety of moves. I didn't love the pass rush radar when he's kind of swooping around the edge, which is what his kind of first step quick style. That's how you would end up winning in the league. But last night, he put Noteboom in a blender a handful of times, one-on-one. The scheme was really good as well. Anthony Weaver deserves a bunch of credit. They've been blitzing at a really high rate all season, in part to cover up the lack of a pass rush. Last night, he just backs off the blitz completely. They show pressure a ton, but it's really just twisting and games and stunts and all that stuff up front. And Robinson was really good at kind of swooping around and crashing inside and being kind of part of the more cohesive pass rush plan rather than just you go and win one-on-one. So I thought that was by far his most impressive game. He did have the one-on-one reps you mentioned there. He got the sack. He got a bunch of pressures. Some of them unblocked, but that was, again, part of the more cohesive plan. That's his job. That's his role, and he executed it really well. So I thought it was a pretty impressive performance from the Dolphins in general up front. Certainly Campbell, you mentioned Seiler, was really, really good last night. And then Chop would be the one that stands out. Okay, is there more meat on the bones here? I always thought he'd be maybe a 2-year, 3-year project before we could kind of see maybe a more all-around player, and we would get these highs and lows. And even this season, he's been a player where the Bills planted Dawson Knox on him. Not exactly known as one. You don't want a tight end on the top edge rusher that you're facing anyway for the most part. Certainly not someone like Dawson Knox. And Dawson Knox handled him for like 6 straight up one-on-one reps when the Bills faced the Dolphins, which is just not good enough at this level, obviously. So to see him kind of come along earlier, be maybe a bit more diverse in what he can do and how he can win for you, I think is just a major, major boost for the Dolphins moving into the second half of the season.
Now, I do want to flip to the other side because I think that was it's a noteworthy story there as well. Because when we talk about the Los Angeles Rams and what they could be this season, now sitting at 4-5, the season's not over yet by any means. They're still within winning this division as tight as the NFC West is, but that would have been a really good win for them to get, especially at home, to really help their cause to make the playoffs. So when I look at this team, and a big area where they struggled last night, it was along the offensive line. And the talk going into this week in Monday Night Football was the cavalry was coming back, right? I mean, Steve Avila was back for the first time since week 1. Joe Noteboom was back for the first time since week 1. Jonah Jackson was back for the first time since week 2, I believe. So there'd been a lot of time missed between these guys now back into the lineup. And the expectations were, okay, like I said, the cavalry is coming. We are getting better. We survived to this point in the season. Now we're getting a lot of our scheduled starters back out there. And it looked like they kind of needed a game altogether to really get back together, if you will. So was that something that you noticed where you go, we might have been, overblowing or just looking through rose-colored glasses what this Rams offensive line might be the second these guys got back? Or do you have a lot of faith in this group that next week and the week after is going to be much better and that the Rams offensive line is going to get back on track with these guys now healthy?
I don't know if I have a ton of faith just in the raw individual talent across the line. Jackson at center really, really struggled. Just bad snaps, really basic things, right, that you just can't have. And we've talked about this a ton throughout the season, like just the lack of continuity when you're facing this level of mugging, this level of like fake outs from the defense, right? Who's coming, who's not coming. You're going to get unblocked stuff if you just don't have the level of chemistry and continuity among the 5 guys. So that should improve as the season goes along, but it's not, they're running out of time here, right? Where they're probably gonna have to rip off 2-3 wins out of 4 games over the coming weeks. Like they just don't have the time now to have the weight on that continuity and chemistry aspect of it. To have 8 unblocked pressures against a team that is not blitzing is just nowhere near good enough at this level. And to not be able to finish drives because you're just getting shelled by your own offensive line is not good. And it just has a compound impact on the entire operation. I thought Stafford was pretty poor last night for the most part. Even when there was open things there, he was kind of hesitant or he was speeding things up. And that, to me, I just don't want to give a cop out to Stafford. The throws he has to hit, he's got some of the receivers back, right? They've been healthy at the receiver spots. And there are a couple of really big, cool, big-time throws. But this has been the story for Stafford, even when the line's been not healthy, that yes, there's way more pressure than there should be. Yes, there's more unblocked pressures than there should be, but that has an impact on even the plays where there isn't any pressure, where he's just missing throws they have to hit. And so you can still see that there's just a skittishness in the general operation of the offense because he doesn't have a ton of faith in what the offensive line can do. And if someone like Noteboom is playing it maybe not 100%, or maybe he's just still feeling himself back and there's some rust there. I thought with Steve Avila, who is a player I just absolutely love, I thought there was rust there in the run game, but he was probably the best of them in terms of pass pro. If you just have to take time to get that rust off, and Noteboom is going to really struggle at right tackle, the concertina effect along the rest of the group is just, you just cannot cover that up in 2 to 3 weeks. So I would always rather, even if the players are struggling, at least have the continuity and chemistry of who's out there to try and eliminate the unblocked stuff. Again, to have 8 unblocked pressures for a team who's not blitzing and they're bluffing constantly, I just don't know how you can have that at this stage in the season. I'll understand that they're working guys back in there and that kind of stuff can happen, but to have snap issues, a ton of blown protections, that may correct itself quickly, but it's pretty unusual for that stuff to get worked out within 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah, I offensive line, obviously this is a trenches version of the PFF NFL show, so we're going to be a little bit biased, but it's such a major part of getting your team to its ceiling. And I think when you look at Super Bowl winners of the past, a lot of them get lucky when it comes to the continuity and the lack of injuries and these guys playing a lot of snaps together. And even with the Rams getting a lot of their guys that maybe would have started the season as their scheduled starters back, well, they've missed a ton of time. And not only have they missed a ton of time like individually, but they've also missed a lot of time together. You kind of open that segment talking about like, okay, well, I don't totally believe in the individual talent of all of these guys. You know, if you separate them one by one, it's not the most impressive offensive line. But as we have seen before, there are offensive lines that are like that. Look at the Washington Commanders, for example, right? I know Sam Cosby's fantastic, and they added Tyler Biadasz, and no disrespect to the rest of the guys in the offensive line, but we went into the season thinking, okay, like outside of Cosby, you know, it's not like it's a group that really that defensive lines really fear individually, but all together, they're playing very, very well. And we thought that could have been the case with the Los Angeles Rams, but when you miss that much time, it's hard to lean on that. It's hard for that to be the case. So if the Rams are going to end up making the playoffs, that offensive line is going to have to really come together pretty quick, and they're going to have to hit the second half of the season pretty hot. Thanks for watching, everybody. Make sure you like and subscribe the video. And if you don't have a PFF Plus subscription, you can get one to see all the premium stats that we talked about here on the show, plus the expert betting and fantasy advice over at subscribe.pff.com. The description is also right below, so if you are not a PFF Plus subscriber, you can come one today.